Hey everybody, Mary Fran Bontempo here. And before we get started with today's show, I just wanted to let you know that my new book, From Broken to Brilliant, How to Live a Brilliantly Resilient Life, is available on Amazon. Super excited about this book, which provides a roadmap of how to live a brilliantly resilient life. You'll get advice not only from me, but from so many dozens of our podcast guests who were kind enough to share their tips on how to reset, rise, and reveal your own brilliance. So head on over to Amazon, get a copy of the book From Broken to Brilliant, and now let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. What's your train wreck? Everyone has one. The question is, are you just visiting or are you going to live there? I'm Mary Fran Bontempo. Join me and let's learn how to come through those train wrecks, not broken, but brilliant. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. I have a new friend from across the pond today, Kate Berski, who is an entrepreneur and writer and the author of 30 Phobia, Why Your 20s Suck and How to Get Unstuck. I mean, I just read the title and this woman spoke to me. I mean, that's how I talk if people know me from who I am. So anyway, Kate, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be acquainted.
I am so delighted to have this conversation because there's a lot of talk over young people and how they're not stepping up and what's going on, and they seem so lost and all of that. And as we discussed before we started airing here, my kids are a little bit older, so they're out of that. But what you may not know about me is my son, who is my oldest, who's just about to turn 40, had a really serious substance abuse issue, and that took place in his late teens and 20s. So I have a little bit of a window into that, but most of it is not quite that dramatic, but it is happening with people in their 20s. So, first of all, tell me a little bit about you. You're an entrepreneur and a writer, and then I want to get into where this hit you from, and I'm guessing maybe personal experience.
Sure, yeah. And, we certainly have some things in common in terms of family members that have been through real struggles in that time of life. And, yeah, I was also no exception to that. So sometimes, I'm 41. Sometimes people ask me, why are you 40 something talking about life in your 20s? And I kind of always think that, life must be lived forwards, but can only really be understood backwards. And
Hmm.
it's only really in my 30s that I started to really put the pieces together of what went on in that tumultuous decade of my 20s and why it was so damn hard,
Yeah.
while at the same time, society seemed to be telling me that these should be the best days of my life. And that's exactly why in the title of my book, 30 Phobia, I needed to put it out there. Your 20s do suck. If you feel like your 20s are sucky, you are not alone. You're actually in the majority. So let's just put that out there. The 20s are not the best days of your life. It is a myth. It needs to be busted. But equally, I've been through a journey myself of getting unstuck. It took a long time. It took a lot of self-reflection. And that's what I decided to kind of put into my book alongside with help from over 40 experts in the mental health, mindset, and motivation space. So I've been on a huge journey myself. In my 20s, I suffered a major quarter life crisis, which is the kind of start point for my book and my project, and why I wanted to wind back to that time of life for this 30 Phobia project. And I think, probably many of your listeners who are, focused on self-improvement and self-growth, they might be also quite overachievers. And that's kind of what my experience was in younger life. I was quite academic, I was social, I was doing pretty well, I was ticking along. And then suddenly I hit this point in my mid 20s after finishing education and getting into my first kind of first couple of jobs in advertising. I was single. And up to that point, I'd been perfectly happy with the kind of state of affairs. But I suddenly started looking around in my mid 20s and thinking, oh, I'm not actually where I expected to be in life. And I started looking at my friends and peers and thinking, gosh, I'm the only one who's still single. I'm the only one who's not financially secure, who doesn't really feel like they found their path and purpose. I've got absolutely no money in the bank, and as the decade wore on, I was more and more influenced by social media as well, which I know is a massive theme that we're probably going to touch on. And you're not just now comparing yourself to your immediate peers, but to the whole of the world. And often, when it comes to social media, to the kind of rich, beautiful, wealthy, and dishonest 1%. And it is no surprise that when we compare our lives to those fantasy lives of other people, we feel like we're falling short. And that is very much the experience that I had in my late 20s. Culminating in a very uncool girl moment where I had at that point a fairly long term boyfriend who wasn't really committing to me. And I ended up issuing him with a very uncool marriage ultimatum and kind of saying, look, I'm 29 now. If you're not going to commit, if we're not going to kind of get married and settle down, then I'm out of here. Um, Suffice to say, nobody really likes that kind of ultimatum. And he was not impressed. It did not go down incredibly well. But it was that hard stop. He did say no to that. But that hard stop was really exactly what I needed at that time, because that, at the age of 29, turning 30, was the first time in my life that I'd thought to question that timeline, that internal
Hmm.
societal timeline that I had internalized to the point of panic. I had never stopped to question, are these the things that I want? Are these the things, marriage, babies, white picket fence, money in the bank? Are these the things that are going to make me happy and fulfilled in life? And it turns out they were not. Actually, when I did that self reflection, when I had that rejection and I turned inwards instead of looking outwards all the time, I realized that what I wanted for my life looked quite different. What it looked like was traveling the world, living in abundant different countries, meeting lots of new people, starting a business, making myself deliberately financially insecure, not getting married and settling down at 29. That actually, my dream scenario would have been my worst case scenario. I'm
Hmm.
convinced that if I hadn't have had that quarter life crisis, I would be having a midlife crisis right now. And my life now at 41 looks entirely different to the life I wanted at 27. But it's so much better. And that's kind of the journey I want to take other women on, and, to reassure them that, there are alternative timelines, there are alternative ways of living your life that are actually even better than the one you might be kind of internalizing right now from society, from your family, that kind of thing.
I'm scribbling away here because there's so much brilliance in everything that you said. And it's kind of a mixed bag because I think not that it's necessary, but it's out there. And I think observationally, as a young person, you see what other people are doing, you see what your peers are doing. Your family has lived in a certain way, so you kind of growing
Mm,
up thinking that that's the norm.
mm,
And it is for a lot of people, but it's also situational because just because that happened in the lives of all of these other people doesn't mean that it's going to happen or did happen in your life. And
mm,
that, to your point of looking inward, that's that space that I think is understandably lacking in the 20s because up to that point, you're following the script. I go
mm,
to school, I do the thing, I go to college, I get my job, so on and so on. And you had mentioned in my research about like kind of ticking all of those
mm,
boxes, that checklist that you have for yourself. But those checklists, while sure they can be a guideline, one of the things that I talk about in being brilliantly resilient is not being married to an outcome. You take a step and it's going to be imperfect because all action is imperfect. But then we
mm,
have to allow life a chance to evolve. And we also have to do some introspection, which I don't think is quite normal in your 20s because it is and it isn't. It's introspection, but it's comparative introspection. Why am I not meeting the bars everyone else is, as opposed to what you said and going, Jesus, is this what I really want? So where is that missing thing when we should be saying to our young people, okay, you did the things, but now what do you want next? When does that fit? And should we be making that a part of our conversations with young people?
I think it needs to start as early as possible. I mean, when I started researching 30 phobia and milestone anxiety, that is kind of the fear of these milestone
Mm.
birthdays or these milestone events because you're not quite where you expected to be by that stage. When I started researching it, I thought this was going to be a late 20s problem because my personal quarter life crisis came at 29. But what I found when I was putting myself out there on TikTok and on Instagram is girls and boys as well, as young as 18, 19, messaging me saying, I'm really panicking, I'm really anxious, I'm terrified of getting older because I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I feel completely stuck, I feel completely lost, I'm overwhelmed. I'm running out of time, an 18-year-old telling me they're running out of time to achieve all these
Oh,
goals that they expect, so that just tells me that you can never start too young. Just reassuring young people that that feeling of uncertainty is normal, it's to be expected, it's part of life. And uncertainty really is just a flag for opportunity. It means that you've got so many opportunities ahead of you, and you don't need to necessarily just wed yourself at the age of 18 to a particular lifeline or a particular timeline. In fact, many people have discovered that that hasn't made them happy. So you on the other side of things, you can speak to those women who have ticked all the boxes by 30. They've got married, they've got the job, they've got the house, and they get to later on in life and they think, is this it, am I done? How did I
yes.
end up here?
Yeah.
So I think it's so much more productive to start questioning those things when you're younger, and just kind of really to stop looking out for external validation and inspiration. And that's getting harder in a social media age. And start, as you say, looking in and really trying to figure out, what are your core values? What is it that's going to make me feel happy and fulfilled? I've only recently found out that one of my core values is freedom, which explains a heck of a lot about why I'm
Oh.
not happy living in the same place for too long, doing the same job for too long, speaking to the same people all the time. It's clarified a lot to know my core values, and it's taken me longer, and I want to shortcut that process for younger people.
And I don't think that we necessarily speak to that, as parents, as educators, as people in that stage where you're absolutely right. In the high school years is when it's important. Look, this is what you see around you. This is circumstantial. This is where you've grown up. This is what people are doing around here. That doesn't mean that that's you. And you have to
Mm,
allow yourself the opportunity to think beyond your walls, so to speak, but also think about them in terms of what it means to you in going forward, as opposed to that cultivated look that you see on social media. What did those things mean to you? So it really is kind of an interesting balance, I think, that we have to strike in terms of, yes, look around you, feel what you like and don't like about your world, but also look externally, but also realize that neither of those two things, separately or together, necessarily is you.
mm,
So it's it's really interesting to think about how we can kind of have those conversations and with young people. And I'm looking to one of the things that you say here, throw out the rule book and write a new one with no deadlines. I love
mm,
that you put that out there. So tell me what you say to these young people, and tell me what you give me a couple of steps that they can kind of go through, because when the world is suddenly your oyster, it's a scary thing. So I think they need a bit of a roadmap. They've been in school for their whole lives where people are telling them things. Give me a little bit of a roadmap here for them.
Yeah, I love that question. And I think the first thing to do, I mean, I loved what you said earlier as well about small steps. I think as a society, we have this milestone mentality. We're focused on the big wins, the big ticket items. We celebrate those huge moments. And that makes us kind of live a bit in the waiting room, like we're waiting for those
Oh,
big milestone events and rushing for them and pushing for them when we could just be taking small steps and celebrating the now. I think the first thing that I always say is, and you also said it, everything is temporary, especially feelings. The way you are feeling right now, the way your life looks right now, it is not going to be forever. And I think a lot of what's going on now is young people are defining themselves by that struggle and kind of almost internalizing a label that they're going to carry with them for life. So while I would never dismiss genuine brain-based mental health problems, for example, I think a lot of young people, they feel anxious, but they don't have an anxiety disorder. And I think there's a lot of confusion around the
Yes.
language, which is not helpful. And I know the difference between mental health, which is something we all have, which fluctuates and it goes up and down, and mental illness, which is a very different thing. It is something that endures beyond your circumstances. And I think one question that you can ask if you're feeling anxious in particular, because that is the emotion that I get most from
Right.
people in their 20s. If you are feeling anxious, can you identify one factor, two factors, several combinations of factors that are happening to you right now in this situation, which are making you feel that way? 9 times out of 10, I ask that question and there is a reason. Actually, I've just been through a breakup. I'm unemployed right now and I'm struggling to find work. You know, a life event, my parents are splitting up, or, there's something going on in their life which is temporary and situational, which is giving them feelings of anxiety, depression, low mood. It doesn't mean they're going to feel that way forever. It doesn't mean they are depressed, they are anxious for life. So, it's a delicate topic, but mental health is a huge challenge for young people, and there's genuinely a mental health epidemic. And I want to help them separate the situational factors from the enduring factors. So I think, ask yourself, is there something in my situation which is going to change or that I can change, that's making me feel this way? And it's also about separating the neutral facts from the interpretation you're putting on those facts. So often young people will say, I'm single. That is a fact. I do not have a partner. I am unpartnered right now. Okay, that is a fact. What is not fact is the story you're telling yourself about why you're single. I'm single because I'm overweight. I'm single because I don't look like those girls on Instagram. I'm single because I'm not funny enough. I'm single because I'm
Mm.
not clever enough. I'm single because I don't have the right job, the right clothes size, the right hair color. Endless stories and meanings that we attach to neutral facts. So I would also encourage people, if they're getting carried away with that negative self-talk, which is a huge challenge for all of us, whatever stage of life we're in, separate the neutral facts from the meaning you're attaching, because that meaning might not be the reality. And I actually do have a 4-step approach which kind of frames the way that I help people work through a quarter life crisis or feeling stuck in a particular area of life. And we've talked about the first part already, which is stop looking outside, stop looking out for external validation, what other people think of you, what other people are doing. Start looking in and tuning into what your own wants, needs, and desires are, and what you would like your life to look like. Um, Reframe your goals, moving away from that milestone mentality, focusing on the end goal all the time and panicking about it, to more of a process positive, which is exactly what you said as well. It's all about, okay, you might have that goal, but nobody ever climbed Mount Everest by standing at the bottom looking at the top. It's one foot in front of the other, baby. It's the only way. And, it's been proven now that process goals are actually a lot more effective than milestone goals. So don't tell me I need to lose 50 pounds in 6 months. Tell me I can go to the gym for 20 minutes every day. I can go for a walk for 30 minutes twice a week. Break the goals down into something more achievable and something process driven that's in your control, because the end goals are not always in our control. There are so many factors. If your end goal is, I hear people say all the time, I have to find my person, I have to find my partner by the time I'm 30. You can't control that. What you can control is the steps you're taking, your behaviors that are going, however slowly, minuscule micro steps, baby steps towards that goal that might put you in a better position to achieve it. And then there's much less room for kind of feeling so overwhelmed by focusing on the end goal. It's so much more achievable when you just take the small steps. And the final one we also talked about, which is society is very good at celebrating the big wins and the big milestone moments, the babies, the marriages, the engagements. And when you're not ticking those big boxes, it can be easy to believe that you are failing at life. But every single one of us has small wins that are worth celebrating every single day, and they look different to different people. Why don't we celebrate the alternative milestones? Why don't we celebrate becoming a dog mom? Why don't we celebrate starting therapy, getting out of a toxic relationship, cutting off that friend that's bringing you down? Why don't we celebrate getting out of bed in the morning when you've had a bout of depression? Those small wins, giving yourself credit and, looking for those little moments of joy right now rather than waiting for those big moments and living in the waiting room. So it's all about those four steps. It's stop looking out, start looking in, reframe your goals to become more process positive, and celebrate the small wins. And whatever area of life I'm talking about, whether it's finance, job, relationships, health, mental health, it all comes down to those four steps. And it's interesting when I interviewed experts in every single area, from kind of therapists and coaches to wedding planners and finance experts, they all kind of said the same sorts of things, which is why I feel quite confident in the framework.
So, what I'm really hearing here is celebrate the process, which is happening in the present, as
Mm,
opposed to pining for the goal, which is steps and steps and steps away and may change as you work through the process. Like that's one of the other things that
yeah.
everything that you're talking about is just is making the bells go off in my head because these are all the things that I talk about in terms of living a brilliantly resilient life. We don't have control over the end game. And every time we
Mm,
institute a step, which as you and I talked, I think before, is going to be imperfect because nothing we do is perfect. So whatever you do, institute that imperfect step, but then wait with a little bit of wonder because one of two things is going to happen, something or nothing. And if it's
mm.
something, you can continue towards that, whatever you think your goal should be. And if it's nothing, then you get a chance to go, oh, what am I going to try next? But I'm hearing like be more present, which again is a mindset thing that everybody talks about, and celebrate those moments and those days. The other day, my husband and I finally cleaned out the garage. I was like, oh, thank God. And I was like, by the end of the day, I was so excited, but we don't allow ourselves to celebrate those big little things because, like you said, of that milestone mindset. It is
Exactly.
such important information, because to get all woo-woo here, you only have the moment, you only have the day. So, one of the books that I had written was called The 15-Minute Master. And it was like, what can you do in the next 15 minutes to make something a little better? Not solved, not fixed,
Mm.
better. And it sounds like, in terms of getting back to that whole mindset thing, that's where we have to bring the focus back, bring it to the present.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And, someone said something to me which was really poignant, which was, depression is living in the past, anxiety is living in the future, happiness is living in the present. And I always remind myself of that. I'm like, if I want to be happy, what do I want to do to be in the present? And, even my daughter, I've got a 5-year-old daughter, and she's so much better at this than me. I mean, kids they
Oh,
live in the moment, right? And it's funny, like I live in Spain, so it's sunny a lot of the time. It's beautiful, but we have had some rain recently, and been getting me down because I hate rain. It's the whole reason I've left England. And but she's like, "Oh my gosh, it's amazing! There's puddles. I get to splash in the puddles." And I'm like, so I'm trudging through this rain, thinking I really don't want this weather, and she's thinking, "How fun! This is an opportunity for some fun I can't have on a sunny day." So I love that. And we introduced her to we call it the grateful game. And she is the one every day at dinner time. She's like, Mummy, let's do the grateful game. What are you grateful for? And it's just so sweet. So even at the age of 5, we said earlier, it's never too young. Even at the age of 5, introducing her to the idea of being grateful. And she helps me stay in the moment. I think kids are great for that.
it's funny. I said to you earlier, I have 9 grandchildren, which still just completely amazes me. But no matter what I have to do, there's that list again, that to do list
Mm,
during the day. When I am with them, it's all about that moment. It's all about being right there because they're not anywhere but right there. It's
yeah.
what game can we play? What can we do? What can I do in this moment to bring myself a little joy? Not that they're thinking about it that way, but it's just that instinctive thing. And I think that is instinctive for children. And
Mm,
as we raise them, we get them thinking about the stuff that's not so much fun. And sure, it's necessary, but I think that the job can start even as you did with your daughter, encouraging the joy in the moment. What kind of joy can we find in the moment, in where we are right now? And everything is a building block. So if you start to change your mindset to thinking, okay, what's good about right now? Pretty soon your perspective changes, and then your perception can change about even where you want to go with things. Because that future thinking, oh my gosh, it's exhausting as well. I don't think it leaves you
Yeah.
any energy to even enjoy the moment because you're constantly spinning.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, we also need to celebrate a little bit more what I call the squiggly path to success.
Love.
Because I think those of us who have had more sort of life experience now, you talk to any woman in her 40s, 50s, 60s, their road has not been linear, especially even when it comes to things like careers. We are pivoting and pivoting again and changing careers in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s now. So things, this pressure that young people feel to decide on their job and their career and find their purpose by 30, it is nonsense because that might be their job for now, but they're going to have four different careers, over the course of their career. And, technology is evolving at such a pace that you probably don't even know the job title you'll be doing at the end of your days. I'm sure you've had several kind of eras. I myself have had many different career eras. And I find it exciting. I don't feel like I've changed my mind. I feel like each one, like you say, is a building on the previous. And it's great to think that, you don't have to have everything ticked off by 30 and then what you're just living out your days, waiting it out. That's terrifying to me. I think uncertainty is exciting, rather than anxiety inducing at this stage of life for me. I've kind of changed the way I think about it.
And that is it's so essential because to your point, the world is changing at an exponential pace. I mean,
Mm,
and I honestly think it's kind of struck me once you said that a lot of these patterns that kids think that they have to be in are really based on an older model of what the world was like. And
mm,
that's normal. I mean, you grow up with your parents giving you their mindset, but things were very structured back then. I mean, when I was in college, even then, it was okay, you're a woman, you can be a lawyer, a teacher, a nurse. Those are kind of the things you do, and you get married and you have kids. But that's because that was the way the world worked back then. If we
mm.
don't recognize that even the world is situational on a vast, huge level, we miss the opportunity to experience what's happening now. And this whole brilliantly resilient thing, it's not like I woke up and when I was 18 and went, oh, I'm going to start that. It just happened. And it happened because I was open to, okay, what's going to happen next? And if you, as a young person, recognize that each of those things that you're doing is an opportunity to build what I call transferable skills, you are equipped. You are
Mm.
going to be equipped for that next thing because these skills that you're building can be taken from place to place.
Exactly. I mean, one incredibly positive thing that's happening with the current generation of 20 somethings, Gen Z, if you like, I believe they're the first generation to really push back on the status quo as well. There's a lot of negative press about 20 somethings, which I feel is incredibly unfair. And I think a lot of it is a reaction to previous generations not having challenged those traditional milestones, timelines, ways of working, the workplace. They've quite rightly called out and said this hasn't worked. They saw the previous generation absolutely falling apart trying to have it all, and they're like, this is not possible. We're not trying to have it all. The way that they work is so different and in many ways much more intelligent than the way that previous generations worked. I think, in terms of diversifying streams of income, things like that. Gen Z really pioneered that,
Mhm.
as well as developing careers through social media. I have a lot of negative things to say about social media, but on the positive side, it has leveled the playing field. It means that if you want to be a writer, you can write and you can put yourself out there for free. If you want to be a podcaster, you put yourself out there. People will discover you. It's incredibly liberating in many ways. So yeah, I also find it important to advocate for a generation of people that can't always advocate for themselves and who, don't always get advocated for by older generations. I think it's so easy for older people to look back at people in their 20s and say, oh, you've got nothing to worry about. You've not got any real responsibilities. But
Hmm.
the world that they've been formed in is completely different to even my generation of millennials. And we need to have a lot more empathy for what they've been put through and the unique situation that that generation have been brought up in.
You know, it's so important, I think, to validate where they are right now, where and recognize that this isn't the end of your script. And you know, I often say to my kids when we talk about raising kids, I'll say to them, I have no experience with that. I don't know. This is it's a whole new world. You're going to have to figure this out. But again, you take those core values with you, which is so important to know. Because if you know what you want to say yes to, you'll know what you want to say no to.
Yeah.
And it's okay to do that. It's okay to go, this isn't it. It's funny when my husband and I go to restaurants, we always chat up the wait staff and everything, just because they're people. We want to know a little bit about them. And, you know, we'll say to them, so, you know, what do you do? What do you do when you're not here? Because it's only one part of their lives.
Mm,
That job, and you know, you need to do something to feed yourself and all of that. But I think in the past, the job was always the defining factor. It's not that anymore. Life is so much more than about what you do so that at the end of the day, you get the money to feed yourself. I mean, if we look at jobs as a means to an end of staying alive, some people are great and very happy doing what they love, but that's not always the case. So you can find fulfillment in many other ways, but it doesn't have to be that, you know, oh, I'm a dentist, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher, I'm a whatever. Maybe that's true and maybe that's great, but it doesn't have to be the defining factor. And I think for all of the generations prior, it was. And that's a big
yeah.
change in the world today.
Yeah, I agree. We're in a different time, and I think there's a lot of positive to come from it.
Well, this has been such a delightful conversation. I'm feeling empowered for the younger generation because I want them to understand each generation gets to redefine the playbook, and they should have permission to redefine it for themselves and to figure out what moves them and how they can exist in a world that really none of us understand. I mean, I don't know what the heck's going on these days. So if there's something you could leave us with, tell me what that is. And first of all, I want to encourage everyone to get the book 30 Phobia, why your 20s suck and how to get unstuck. There it is.
There it is. There it is.
Everybody
The
needs to
big
get.
red 30.
And you know what? I think all generations should read this book because it really it happens to be again situational with the 20 somethings right now, but this can happen to you at any time. I mean, like you
It
to
really
your
can.
earlier point, you can have ticked all the boxes and go, is this it? And I think everything that you say is an opportunity to kind of reset, push that reset button and kickstart things. So leave us with a gem and then tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say if you are feeling anxious about aging up or you're approaching a milestone birthday in particular, know that that is not the dead. That is not a real deadline. So if you're in your 20s, 30 is not the deadline. It is actually the start line. There are genuinely no deadlines on dreams. Women like you, Mary Fran, prove that. You know, you can start a whole new career and find purpose at any age. So really, it is just the beginning. Life really does start at 30.
I love that. And where can we find more about you, Kate? Because I want everybody to be able to check you out as well as the book.
Yeah, so you can find me on my website, kateberski.com. Also on there, there's a free resource that might be interesting to your listeners. So at the end of every chapter in my book, I include mind hacker questions, which are designed to help you find your priorities and get unstuck. So if there's a particular milestone or goal you have in mind, which is troubling you, like, will I ever get there? Am I ever going to have a baby? Am I ever going to get married? Those kind of things. Have that milestone in mind, print out my mind hacker cards and play it like a game with a girlfriend or on your own in a quiet moment. And it just really helps you get clear on if that's really a top priority for you right now and how to get unstuck and start moving forward if it is. So it's like a quick hack if you don't have time to read the whole book, although it doesn't take too long to read the whole book either.
I love that mind hacking questions. This has been so important of a conversation because we're always being told, change your mindset, but nobody tells us how to do that. So these practical steps that you have given us and also given people of other generations to think about, like, don't be so hard on these guys. This is a tough spot that they're in, and it's safe to say the world has never experienced all of this before. So thank you for giving us empathy. Thank you for giving us practicality. Please, everybody, please check out Kate Berski and this amazing book, 30 Phobia, Why the 20s Suck and How to Get Unstuck. I love it. It's not just for that younger generation. We should be reading it too. And if you want a little bit more inspiration, head on over to brilliantlyresilient.net, sign up for our newsletter. Kate will be part of that with our brilliance bits when this episode airs. And we will see you all the next time on the next episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Join our Facebook group and follow us on YouTube to be inspired with tools to reset, rise, and reveal your brilliance.